One moment of weakness can destroy everything a man spent his whole life building. There is a dangerous lie many men believe. They believe that one small decision, one small compromise, one private moment of weakness won't really matter. But the Bible shows us something different. One moment of weakness can change a man's life forever. Watch this.
In the story of David and Bathsheba in the book of Samuel, King David becomes infatuated with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite, who is away at war. David summons Bathsheba to his palace and sleeps with her, resulting in her pregnancy. In an attempt to conceal his adultery, David brings Uriah back from the battlefront and tries to convince him to sleep with his wife. However, Uriah remains loyal to his fellow soldiers and refuses to enjoy his marital privileges while they are still at war. In desperation, David orders Uriah to be placed in the front line of the battle, where he is killed. God sends the prophet Nathan to confront David, expressing God's displeasure and prophesying the consequences he will face as a result of his actions, which was the death of the child. This story highlights David's moral failure and the consequences of his sins.
Let me say something to the men watching this. What you just saw is one of the most powerful warnings in the entire Bible. Because the man in this story was not an evil man. He was King David, a warrior, a leader, a man chosen by God. David defeated giants, led armies, and wrote songs praising God. The Bible even described David as a man after God's own heart. But even a great man can destroy his life with one moment of weakness. It's not impossible. You know, the story in 2 Samuel 11 tells us that David stayed home while his army went to war. And while walking on the roof of his palace, he saw a woman bathing. Her name was Bathsheba. David knew she was married. He knew she belonged to another man. But instead of walking away, instead of turning his eyes, instead of controlling his desires, David allowed temptation to take control. He called for her. He slept with her. And in that moment of weakness, everything changed. Everything, man. Because sin never stays small. That moment led to deception. That deception led to betrayal. And that betrayal led to murder. David had Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, sent to the front lines of the battle so he would be killed. Think about that. Just think. A man who once killed giants for God was now destroying his own life for lust. And the consequences didn't stop there. David's household was never the same again. You know, violence entered his family. His children suffered. His kingdom experienced turmoil. All because of one moment where a man who should have been disciplined wasn't. Sad. And you know, men today make the same mistake every single day. A man can spend years building his life, working hard, providing for his family, building respect, building a reputation, building a future. And then one moment of weakness, one bad decision, one act of temptation, one lack of discipline can destroy everything. We've seen it a lot. You know, that's why the Bible warns men in 1 Corinthians 10:12, where it says, let him who think he stands take heed lest he fall. In other words, the moment a man think he is too strong to fall is the moment he is closest to falling. And another powerful warning comes from Proverbs 6:27. I said this verse a lot. Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? The answer is no. A man who plays with temptation will eventually be burnt by it. That's a fact. And that is the lesson men must understand. You know, your greatness and your greatest threat is not another man. Your greatest threat is the moment you stop guarding your discipline. Because men really destroy their lives in one giant decision. They destroy their lives in small moments when they think no one is watching. A private message, a secret addiction, a moment of lust, a dishonest decision. And those small moments eventually become big consequences. That's why a real man must learn to master himself. A real man must guard his eyes, guard his thoughts, and guard his discipline. Because everything you are building in your life, your future, your family, your legacy, can be destroyed by one moment of weakness. David was a great man, but every great man must stay vigilant. Because the difference between a man who finishes strong and a man who destroys everything is discipline. And that's important to recognize. We all as men have moments of weakness. I know I have my moments of weakness. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. I've definitely had my moments of weakness. Now, I could sit here and say, thank God it didn't destroy my life in a way that I cannot be here to do what I'm doing. But it could have. One small bad decision almost got me killed. I'll never forget, and I told this story many times. Just by my cousin walking in and saying, hey, them dudes out there, they banged on me. They wanted to know where I was from. They didn't hit him. They didn't fight him. They didn't take his shoes when they was asking him, hey, what's up with them J's? They just pressed him and kept walking. But what I had to do? One small bad decision. I got up as soon as my cousin told me that, and I walked quickly outside and said, who? He pointed them out. They were all the way on the other side of the street. I walked right up to them. I said, what's up? They weren't going to back down. Was a game. They weren't finna back down. And then a fight broke out. At one point in time, I was getting the best of them. And one of them turned around and stabbed me multiple times. I was in a hospital for a couple of weeks. Thank God I lived. I survived. But that was one bad moment, one small decision that could have took my life and changed it forever. We have to be smarter men. We have to use wisdom. We have to use discipline. So we don't put ourselves in a position that David put his family in for generations after him. Because our mistakes can affect everyone else around us. And never forget that.